Hello everybody, Riley here from Middle School Readiness. In today's video, we're starting a brand new series called Soldiers' Stories Beyond the Battlefield. It is a brand new podcast where basically we do the same thing that Behind the Scenes of Public Safety does, except we are only interviewing military personnel, and it's kind of just a way to separate the public safety interviews from the military interviews. So let me not waste your time and we'll get right into the video. Hey everybody, Riley here with Middle School Readiness. In today's video, we're doing something a little different. We're not interviewing somebody from the public safety field. We actually have somebody from one of the military branches, so I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself, and then we'll go ahead and get into the video.
Hey Riley, thanks again for having me on here. My name is Manny Zapata. I'm 32 years old and I served in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. I was there from about 2014 until about 2020 when I got out. Reserve side is a little bit different than active duty side, but it was a lot of fun. I got lots of different opportunities in there for it. And thank you again for having me on the show.
Thank you for being willing to come on and talk about your service. What exactly got you into the Marine Corps? Why did you want to join the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I was always kind of just growing up watching a lot of TV, so I've always just kind of watched a lot of history, different things like that. So I remember watching a lot of old like gun shows on the History Channel and Discovery Channel, things like that. So like the first Marine that I can remember talking about was Arlie Ermey, and he was always on those shows talking about a lot of the history and a lot of the cool things about the Marine Corps. And even when I was like an adult, I pretty much, as far as my history of the Marine Corps went, as far as the background and knowledge of it, there were some Marines from like my town, which was a really small town in Rock Spring. So there's only about 1,000 people in the town when I was there. There's been a handful of Marines as well as other people that served in different branches. So I was always kind of heard about it in the background, but I didn't really want to go into the military. Getting out of high school, it was kind of not so much like the last thing I wanted to do, but it wasn't definitely the first. I wanted to go to school, so I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college for a couple years. And well, when I was there, applied myself as best I could, but I kind of felt like college wasn't the right time for me at the moment. I wanted to do something a little bit different. So from there, I kind of started talking to various recruiters, and that's a funny little story about how I kind of met them and the ultimate way I made the decision there. But after college, went to the Marine Corps, different options. Reserves wasn't something that I even thought about at the time, but talking to recruiters about not only what I wanted to do with like my service, but also what I wanted to do afterwards. That I want to go active, that I want to go reserves, and they kind of talked to me about different options from there. But it's always something I kind of wanted to do. The biggest thing I had to not hurdle, but I just wanted to make sure my parents were aware why I wanted to go, and not so much as not quit going to school and then going to the Marine Corps, but just kind of like why I was doing it. They wanted a little bit more of a plan, and I wanted them to definitely feel a little bit safer that way. That way, they knew what I was doing, kind of situation. So different options, and both my parents they're immigrants, so kind of explaining something like that to them. It took a little bit more detail, just so that way they're well informed in things. Most of them, the most they probably hear about it is like through the news and things like that. So, kind of explain to them that there's more outside of what's reported on the news at the time, which was 2012, I think, at the time. So we were still pretty active in the Middle East and things like that. So, kind of explained to them what I wanted to do, what I wanted to experience, why I wanted to do it, and like what my plans were afterwards. Because, like I said, reserves was a little bit different than going active duty. So from there, just kind of letting them know that I had somewhat of a plan and why I wanted to do it.
Okay. And in the military, what did you do as far as like what your MOS was and what that particularly entailed?
Yeah, I was a 2887, which is a counter mortar radar technician. So I did a lot of electronic work on the lots of artillery cannons and things like that, but as well as the radars that we use to kind of pinpoint. So if you didn't know, artillery, they can obviously shoot rounds out, but they have to get those coordinates from kind of like the forward absorbers and things like that. So a lot of that's different equipments, different vehicles that run on a lot of electricity. So understanding how all those machines worked, as well as the radars, transmitters, and then all the equipment that the firing line is basically using. So from that, just understanding how that all works, because I have to learn how to operate it as well as work on it. It kind of makes your job a little bit easier if you understand that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the radars, which where I did most of my work, if a round or anything like kind of flies through its field, it's able to triangulate. Hey, it broke the field here and it landed here. It had this much of an angle, and it's basically able to calculate where that round came from. And then you send those coordinates, through a long line of Marines and things like that working together to the firing line, and they know where those rounds came from, so you can kind of start sending some rounds back.
Okay. Um, and what you said you're in the reserve. What particular like squadron or group were you in within the Marines?
I was out of JRB Fort Worth. It's there in Fort Worth. It's a great little spot. We're the only artillery unit out there for that base kind of situation wise. So I spent probably 6 of the 8 years that I was in the reserves there.
Okay. Um, and at the end, what was your final rank in the military? Or are you still
I was
able to gain rank?
Yeah. But when I got out in 2020, I was a E5 sergeant.
Okay. What was your favorite, or what would you say was your favorite part of being in the Marines and the military in that particular base and branch?
Well, not the paperwork. I think my favorite part was just the camaraderie. A lot of my best friends were from there. I was in San Angelo at the time, so every time we had a drill weekend, I'd have to drive 4+ hours to get out there once a weekend. So I would just leave work on a Friday, be there by 10 o'clock at night, and then we'd have to be up and ready to go by like 5 a.m. that Saturday. And we spent the weekends out there. They got us, hotels as best they could. Sometimes we had to stay there on base. So a lot of times it was just getting to meet a lot of the guys. When I first got there, I was a little bit older than some of the other guys that kind of came with me through the schoolhouse. So at that point, training wise, it was probably a year and a half that I spent, going through basic, going through training, CIT, combat infantry training, and then from there going to the schoolhouse. So I was in 29 Palms for the first section of my schoolhousing there. So I got to meet all sorts of different guys in the active section. A lot of them, depending on what they were doing, because Marine Corps might be a little bit different than some of the other branches, but when you go into the Marine Corps, you don't know exactly what your final MOS is going to be. You know what your field is. It's a little bit different for reserve side because obviously you need to know those kind of things since you're going to be returning back, and it's the civilian side of it. So I knew my MOS, but a lot of my closest friends that were out there didn't know their MOS. They just knew a field, which is the 2800 field. So a lot of that's like electronics and things like that. So we're in 29 Palms. We had to take basic electronic courses, understanding how relays, switches, and the ground level stuff before we go to our like specialty schoolhouse, which was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So that was it was definitely a shift going from 29 Palms, which was a Marine Corps base, to Fort Sill, which was an Army base.
Hmm.
So we weren't the majority there anymore as the Marines. So the lifestyle kind of changed from schoolhouse to schoolhouse there. So I like to think that it brought a lot of the us Marines closer together, just being out there, knowing that like, hey, like we're kind of isolated in this section, surrounded by a lot of soldiers and things like that in the Army. But I met some of my bestest friends there, made lots of memories, just hanging out, being around each other, things that a lot of us still kind of, if we ever bump into each other, just kind of talk about again. But spent another 9 months to a year, I think, in Fort Sill before I went to my unit there in Fort Worth.
And you just talked about your favorite part. So what would you say was the worst part of being in the military, or what you hated most about it?
Uh, can't say I hated anything about it. I stayed there for as long as I did, and even consider staying a little bit longer. Just kind of where life took me, and different opportunities that were available to me. I knew, like I said, I got there in 2015 or 16, I think, to my unit, and I kind of rose up the ranks a little bit quicker than some of the other guys that were there. So I got a promotion about after a year of being there to a non-commissioned officer. So I was a corporal at that point. And there was a handful of other Marines that were there that had been there a little bit longer than me. So they definitely knew a lot more of the ins and outs, how things kind of worked out there. And experience-wise too, I learned so much from them. Thankfully, I had a good staff sergeant there that kind of saw that I was willing to put in a little extra work. I mean, his biggest thing is like your reserve units, so you're out here for 1 weekend, 2 days. He's like, outside of that, I know nothing about you. So if you show up for 2 days, you show the work that you're willing to do it, you're willing to learn. I was always taking notes, things like that down, because I heard if you go to talk to someone, you don't have a pen and paper, that you're telling them you don't have anything important to say. So little things that I did like that kind of helped me stand out. Once I kind of got promoted and things like that, you kind of learn how things kind of operate. We are an artillery unit, so a lot of that was prepping work and things like that. So there was always like files. We had to make sure that things were, what we had was still operational. So that was quarterly. But for us, quarterlies, every 3 drill weekends that we have to go out there. So we're having to do a lot of the
Yeah.
same paperwork over and over again. So it was a little bit of the opposite of what think Marines do in the day-to-day operations. We're not just working out all the time, running and
Yeah.
doing things like that. That happened, but definitely kind of like the paperwork and things like that. I'm not the smartest or I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed either, but I'm kind of stubborn and things like that. So if I want to learn something, I'll learn it to the best of my ability. And I think just being humble, knowing I don't know everything, and being willing to ask, dudes who are younger than me or a lower rank than me, and not having all the answers and being comfortable with being in that position, I think was a real humbling experience. But um, definitely like how things have to be written down, how things have to do all that. That was kind of one of the things I just didn't like the most, but I knew it was important, so we had to do it properly.
Okay. What would you say would be uh in the most important lesson you learned during your career in the military?
I think one lesson that I always kind of learned and was continuously learning throughout the time there was that you don't know what you don't know. Both administratively, like about a lot of how things were operating, how things were working. So I think one of the most important lessons I learned there was always just kind of be like a sponge, everything, how things are operating, questioning things, not like questioning in a negative sense of like why are we doing this, but like what is the reason we're doing this to kind of get an end goal. Like I said, I knew when I was one of the junior Marines out there, I was kind of do as you're told kind of situation. So I was doing that. I did it pretty well, I guess. Um, I knew I had to do this, so I did it to the best of my ability. And whenever I did get the opportunity to become an NCO and things like that, I just felt like it'd be a lot more comfortable for them because I've been in their shoes of like, hey, this is why we're doing this, and it kind of increased the quality of work, I think, because they knew there was an end goal, and rather than just doing the bare minimum to have that task done, guys were a little bit more comfortable. Like it needs to be done because of this. Like sometimes we would get assignments and it seems kind of irrelevant for us, or we just don't think that like this is kind of dumb or anything like that. So having an understanding, I think, of all the guys, learning that why we're doing this, continuously teaching the guys and reading things like that of you're going to always be learning something. And so in the hindsight, you could always be teaching something. So I think that was the biggest lesson I learned out there is just always kind of be like a sponge trying to learn as much as you can. Because no matter what, you're never going to know enough in those positions.
Okay. Um, while in your military career, would you say you had any? Would you say that there was like a particular person that you looked up to during your career in the military?
Absolutely. You always kind of hear, like I mentioned, Arlie Ermy. He was always one of the mainstream ones that I would always see kind of
Yeah.
situation. And you always hear like the lore and the myths and the things you hear about other Marines. We big part of the Marine Corps is like if you want promotion, you have to read a lot of books. So read a lot of books on like older Marines and Marines from different wars and things like that. Um, it got to the point where I was like surprised when somebody hadn't heard about like Carlos Hathcock being like the
Mm.
first real
Mm-hmm.
Marine sniper in those types of situations, or John Basilone and things like that. So I always enjoyed like looking up to them of like that potential, and it's a big thing they do during boot camp is the history of Marines. There's big things during like the crucibles and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
where every different exercise is designed around Marines who have earned the Medal of Honor. And they weren't all like active duty Marines. They weren't all World War II Marines. Some of them were fairly recent Marines.
Mm-hmm.
But those exercises were based around what they had to do in those situations to earn that Medal of Honor, things like that. So I always kind of heard about them, always read about them, looked up to a lot of them. There's even like small little jokes like when you're running, like at least internally, where the guys that I was with, we always had a joke like, "What would Sergeant Major Castle do?"
Mm.
And you read the stories about him during like the battles of Fallujah, and you hear like the lore and things like that, the things that he did. So you always kind of look up to him, even in the joking situation. You can run a little bit harder, knowing what he's
Mm-hmm.
done, things like that, to look up to him. And I've had the amazing opportunity to meet him, and that's a funny little story in itself. Where like he came, it was during a ball. He came up to me and I was sitting down eating my chicken, and he put his hand on me, and I just remember I looked up at him, and I could see like his aura like around him. I know now it's just a light that was above him, but at the time I was like, "That's Sergeant." I was like, "That's Sergeant Major Castle," and then he was like, "Y'all enjoy y'all's dinner," and walked away. And I was just like, I didn't ask him for a picture, and I shot up, went over there, asked him for a picture. He was like, "Of course." He put his hand on me, and then I put a hover hand on his back because I was like, "This is the only time I've ever been like starstruck or anything like that." So it kind of caught me off guard. But you meet all those guys. Lucky enough to meet all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, like living where I'm at here in Marble Falls, there's Medal of Honor recipients that live in the area and things like that. There's lots of different service personnel that have earned these honors, and there's nothing. I could potentially meet all these guys, and kind of same situation. You get to meet the guys that you hear stories about, those legends and lores. There's 1,000 YouTube videos about each and every single one of them. So knowing that like a lot of these guys are still here, you can still look up to them. They're still doing a lot of work for like veterans and things like that. Not only like in the local community, but like nationwide for veterans all around. So I think that's always been really cool being able to look up to them, like Dakota Meyer, even Tim Kennedy's like around here. So that's always pretty cool that they're still out there, still doing things
Yeah.
for veterans and things like that outside of their service, and it kind of inspires me to do a little bit more. I enjoy talking to dudes that just got out, people that are thinking about going in, like out of high school. I'm happy to answer all those questions for them because, like I said, when I went in, I didn't know anything about the reserve side of it, and I learned way too much about it just to kind of for the same reason. Like I was in school. So I learned the ins and outs of how to be a student and to be a Marine and what kind of benefits you can get from that to make sure that my guys had all that knowledge. So I was able to pass that along to them. But I also got to meet lots of like just regular Marines that like I looked up to as I was training. So a lot of them were telling me to like read these books, do this, don't be lazy kind of situation. Like, if you woke up an hour earlier to study before everybody because you're struggling to study, like maybe you'll do better, common sense, things like that. Things you don't realize are obvious. And a lot of it sometimes are just stop being lazy kind of situations. But I got to meet a lot of those, good and the bad. You meet some instructors or people that are leading you that could be bad. You kind of even learn from them. You don't know what you don't know. So I learned I didn't like not being in the know. So I made sure that my guys were always in the know. I made sure they had all that sort of information. One of my staff sergeants, when I got there, like I mentioned, he saw that I was willing to do a little extra work. I was taking notes. So that was my Staff Sergeant Indris. But he helped me out tremendously. I was able to text him with questions and things like that. He wasn't in school, so he didn't know how the reserve school side unit worked. But I would ask him questions like, "Can I get this document? Can I get this paper? Who do I even talk to find this over here?" And he would answer them all to the best of his ability, right away. Even some of my friends, man, like I got to meet all sorts of people from all around the country that were either in boot camp with me or in the schoolhouse, like dudes that I wouldn't think I'd meet. One of my friends at boot camp, he was a track athlete for like Boise State. And so he was fast. So I was like, well, what can I do to get faster? And he said, like, just run faster. I'm like, you're right. Um, got to meet good friends from like Arizona, and like they're just freak athletes that just are willing, are used to that kind of grind. So they would wake up an hour or two earlier before PT to go work out. And so it kind of turns into like, well, can I go with you? And they're like, yeah. And they weren't waking me up. They weren't making sure I was there. It's kind of like, if you want it, you got to come get it. So I looked up to all sorts of different people like that. And, even small little things like when I was a sergeant, some of my Marines that were like lances and stuff, like they wanted to go officer. So you can kind of see that passion with them. Well, in my head, I'm like, well, what can I do to help them out? Same thing. Is it me getting them a papers? Is it making sure they're talking to all the right people? Is it making sure that they're okay? If something's wrong, just kind of talking to them, make sure they're all good there. I looked up to a lot of the younger ones there too, just seeing their goals, passions, and that it wasn't kind of like wasn't faking it or anything like that. This is what they wanted to do, and what I didn't want to do is get in the way of that. Just making sure that they had everything they needed. And sometimes you rustle a couple feathers, just trying to make sure that they're okay. But as long as I think if you're morally in the right, it's for a good intention, that's okay.
What would you say was the craziest or scariest thing that you either heard about or yourself experienced while in the military?
Well, like craziest, I mean, it just depends on which weekend you want to talk about that we were out there. A lot of fun, different things. Don't know how in detail I can get with like the craziest, but big thing that when we were there, we were basically a Marine Corps unit surrounded by lots of other branches of the military and things like that. So because of that, I don't want to say there was like a spotlight on us, but definitely like a bit more of being at the ready. Every weekend at the time, we were doing a lot of situational trainings, active shooters. If he's outside, if he's inside, things to look out for, like in our community and day to day, just kind of situations. So a lot of that trainings and things like that. If we ever went to the field or anything like that, it was always kind of like constantly doing something. So we'd spend summers out, and our platoon was an even smaller section of our unit there that was just Marines. So we would actually go off kind of not on our own, but we would be separate from the main unit there because we were target acquisition. So we didn't have air conditioning, we didn't have ready-made water and things like that. If we need to use a restroom, you want to use a porta john. That's about a mile walk up that way. So things like that. But we would sleep in tents under the cami nettings, and that's pretty much as cool as it would get for us. And you just have to make sure to be drinking water. And a lot of times in those situations, we weren't getting a lot of like heat casualties or anything like that because that's all we had. We could only drink water to cool down, so we were staying well hydrated. And because of that, we got lots of different opportunities. So got to shoot a lot of different weapon systems out there. A handful of times we got to throw grenades out in training exercises, but sometimes those grenades that we're throwing were like about to expire or something like that. So it's one of those situations like it could take 7 seconds, could take 3, so you don't know. So we'd have to throw it, and sometimes it'd be a dud. So some of the guys are throwing grenades into the tall grass over the berm, and like there's no boom, so now we got to wait for EOD to come out, and then they got to find it, they got to detonate it, and then they leave, and then 2 minutes later, another one doesn't go off. So that was always kind of one of those crazier situations where it's just a lot of waiting and things like that. But it's all fun. That's how you become closer to everybody because at that point, like nobody has phones, nobody has anything. I mean, we've been out there for 2 weeks at this point, so everybody's phone's dead. And everyone's just kind of hanging out, trying to keep themselves entertained as best they could.
Yeah. As you mentioned that you're a reserve unit, so as a reserve unit, what would you say was the extent of actually being in the field? Were you ever actively deployed, or was it just training?
A lot of it was training. We did several different exercises out at different bases, along with like army units, because they had the cannons ready to go. So we would go do a lot of training with that. My unit was fortunate enough, depending on which platoon you were, there was lots of trips that they would go to Okinawa for training there to make sure that the reserve side unit, if they need to deploy, they were well trained. We weren't having to do this training again to kind of catch everyone up. Everyone was always at the ready, which was a big slogan that you hear through us there. Um, I was mainly focused on school at the time, so I wasn't, as quickly trying to raise my hand, trying to get these trips to like, to Europe or to, going across the seas.
Yeah.
A lot of these were happening in the summertime, and so if I wanted to go on that, that means that that's potentially 3 college courses that I would have to take, add an additional semester each time. So my big thing was like I wanted to finish school, I wanted to focus on that. And I did finally, and then so I was like, finally, it's my year. I'm gonna go to Germany or somewhere finally go see some things, and that year was 2020. So all those plans kind of got shut down, obviously,
Yeah.
for different reasons and things like that. So we, kind of just bit the bullet from there, and then just kind of kept on going and kept on growing from there.
Okay. Um, Lost my spot. So now that you're out of the military, would you explain for the viewers your current occupation?
Yeah, right now I am a recreation coordinator with the city of Marble Falls. So I coordinate different youth sports as well as special events and then different recreation programs here. So our camps for our kids in the summertime, we're about to go into the fall now. So a lot of youth soccer. So I'm getting a lot of those contacts, making sure that everything's ready for, all of our youth soccer kids to be playing, but as well as just different special programs that we have going on throughout, the fall and then leading into next year because we have our concert series right now that's about to coming into an end, and so that kind of turns and it goes into the Christmas time. So we got to, we've been planning for that. So now it's time to start, kind of getting the fine details in there, make sure that we're all set for the Trail of Lights and different various activities that we have throughout the city for them. But before this, I was in Belton, so I did a lot of recreation out there while I was still in the Marine Corps Reserve Unit. So, like I said, 2020 was when I started out there, and 2020 was my last year. So, being able to adapt from that, it was a different time, in everyone's life at that time. So we were still drilling every weekend. It was a Zoom meeting, so after the first one, we knocked out all of our online trainings and things like that. So nobody was getting a haircut. Everyone had a beard. So it was one of those weird like Zoom calls, but then they still wanted to keep all the grooming standards. So they made everyone turn on their cameras to show that they shaved. So all I hear is like my guys are shaving in the background as quickly as they can. So that way they wouldn't get in trouble and things like that. So yeah, but that all kind of started with the military. Like I said, I was out in 29 Palms for well over a year. If you don't know, 29 Palms is in the middle of a desert. There's not a lot of different things around. So we would have the library, and this was before like, a lot of the streaming services were really like gaining way. So we would still go and, check out DVDs from the library, or we go to the MCX and literally just hang out and just walk around basically a military version of a Walmart for hours every weekend. Like that's kind of what we did. And then like I said, when I was in 29 Palms, I was like, there's got to be more to it than this. There's nothing to do. But we would do just different hikes. I go to different recreation areas. I get to meet lots of different people in those opportunities. Did a lot of hiking because there's all sorts of trails out there, like near Joshua Tree and different mountains. And everything was, you always find that one guy that has a car and you just get him gas, and all of us would kind of drive off somewhere. But when I went to Fort Sill, I was over there and I was like, oh, finally, there's like a town, there's people, we get to go out. And it was, the whole situation was like the exact opposite of that. Like where a Marine unit will, we have a standard that we kind of meet with other Army units and things like that. So we were on our best behavior at all times. We wanted to go to the movies in town. We kind of knew that like, hey, someone's always watching and they know which ones are the Marines kind of situation. And word always got back to base into our unit, into our gunnies and things like that. So it was always kind of like just being respectful and things like that. And sometimes some other guys would get in trouble and things like that. But for the most part, just being out there, I got to meet different recreation people, hiking, things like that. And even when I was in school, I kind of found out that my school had a master's program that kind of focused a little bit more on that, on city recreation. So I was able to meet all sorts of different people through that, and it kind of drove my passion to want to serve the community, different opportunities for people. Because, like I said, I grew up in a very small town. There was 1,000 people there. There's no stoplights. Nobody had mailboxes, so you'd have to go to the post office to get your mail and things like that. Closest Walmart was like an hour away, so that it was, a lot of times we just spent our summers working or just, staying out of trouble doing things like that. So when I am out here, being able to provide those opportunities for people, I really appreciate it, and it kind of makes me want to take that extra step for them, make sure that they're happy in everything that they're doing out there, and just providing all these different opportunities that I didn't have, but I always thought would be really cool if I did.
Okay. And if you had the option, would you say that you would want to go back into the military?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit older now, but I still stay in relatively good shape. But like I said, I knew I had a plan when I was going in, when I talked to the recruiters and things like that. Active duty wasn't like, I don't want to do active. I want to go reserves. That wasn't like my intention. I kind of wanted to see the options, kind of seeing what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to
Yeah.
finish school. That was my big thing. I knew it would take me a lot longer if I went active in situations like that. Coincidentally, when I talked to recruiters, they said if you want to go active, you're going to have to wait for about a year. And I was like, that's a really long time to just wait. Thankfully, they're like, if you wanted to go reserve side, it'd be like a month. And I was like, okay. Um, had the plan in the back of my head of like, I'll just go and I'll come back to school and finish school while I'm still drilling out of wherever I was going to be at. So I had that opportunity. So when I finished the schoolhouse, I graduated from there on a Friday, and then that Monday I was back in college. So a year and a half after I had,
Yeah.
decided that this is what I wanted to do.
Okay. And is there any like tips or main things that you would think that a new person going into the Marines or any military branch would need to know?
Yeah, I think definitely educating yourself on what each branch kind of offers you. Pay wise, it's not going to be much different branch to branch. Just
Yeah.
depends on what you wanted to be doing with that time. I had mentioned like for active on the Marine Corps side, you're getting a field, not so much a specific job. I think in the Army, Air Force, you can kind of dictate which kind of job you want to do. So
Mm-hmm.
for my like Marines and things like that, you're joining the Marine Corps to become a Marine first and foremost. That's kind of why the reasoning behind that. And every job in the Marine Corps is kind of oriented and in some way it's made for like combat efficiency. So every job in there. The Marine Corps doesn't have like a medical section, so if something
Mm-hmm.
like that's pretty important to know. So there's no
Yeah.
medics or anything like that in the Marine Corps. But there are corpsmen, which are in the Navy. So if
Mm-hmm.
being a corpsman in the medical field, helping Marines out is something you want to do, then you should know like it's the Navy that you have to go through that for a lot of
Yeah.
those different things. So I think that's a real big one. But just having an idea of what you wanted to do. If you go kind of to a recruiter saying I just want to be a Marine, whatever job you have, it might not be the most you know high flying job you think it is. You could
Mm-hmm.
be a cook, you could be admin, you could be a military police officer, things like that. For the Marine Corps,
Yeah.
it just depends. Having an understanding of what kind of field you want to do, if you want to go into law enforcement afterwards, maybe an MP is probably one of those nice jobs that kind of sets you up for that, kind of getting familiarized with that position. But just opportunities are out there. Being open minded to it. Like I said, with the Marine Corps, um, jobs come, opportunities are a little bit slimmer to get on. So if you're showing that you're that guy willing to volunteer, willing to step in, you're sweeping when everyone else is just kind of on their phones and things like that, standing out like
Mm-hmm.
that, just putting yourself out there, always volunteering, willing to do a little bit extra work outside of, just in the reserve side, outside of just your weekend or anything like that, kind of helps you stand out, and it makes the decision making a little bit easier when opportunities arise and they're trying to figure out who they want to send to those. So I think just being educated, and then on hindsight, like I mentioned earlier, not just educating yourself, but educating your family on why you want to do it. I was the first one in my family to join the military. I was also the first one to go to school. So
Mm.
it's something that, like, going to school was one thing that my dad was really proud of, and I didn't want to disappoint him and think I was just dropping out to join the military.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to know that I intend to come back and finish this thing, but like I said, just educating them, like, this is why I chose this. Because he did ask me, like, why the Marines, why not like Air Force, why not any other branch, and I did my best to kind of explain that to him. Just kind of what I wanted. Like, personally, I like to. I don't like being second place. I'm a pretty competitive guy with certain things, but I just knew that I felt like who I was, how I was raised, the morals that I had, they kind of aligned pretty well with the Marine Corps. So, being the first Marine in my family was one of those huge steps and one of the biggest honors that I kind of walk around. I'm pretty proud of that every day. That I think about it every day. The guys that I was with, the things that I've learned. So it's something that's going to be with me for the rest of my life. But I think just being educated, learning more, because you can always ask questions. Like, you don't have to enlist with the first recruiter you meet. Like
Yeah.
that's their job. They want you obviously to sign up with
Correct.
their branch, but I think it's important to just talk to them, and then there's different bonuses that sometimes that you can get depending on what field you want to take or what job, depending on what branch and things like that needed. So being able to talk to different people, if you don't know which branch you want to join, like, do some research. Different people, what's going on now, like, what's the Air Force doing, what's
Mm-hmm.
the Marine Corps doing, what's the Army doing, even now, like, hey, what does it take to get into the Space Force? I can't tell you because that's a new one that I haven't done too much research in. But there's different options, and even if you're like in the fence about it, you can always like lat move. So when I was in boot camp, there was a handful of guys that came from the Army. Like, they were active duty Army, first or second year into their contracts, and they wanted to go to the Marine Corps, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
Branch to branch is a little bit different. Sometimes you can take your rank basically with you, but
Yeah.
Marine Corps is one of those unique ones where everybody that goes to boot camp, every Marine basically that you've has gone enlisted has gone through the same things that you have in that boot camp. There's no real shortcuts or anything from that. So if you're an E5 in the Air Force, you're going to get back down to at least like an E2 when you graduate boot camp. That's just the way it's set up, because you have to kind of earn that rank in the Marine Corps. You don't
Yeah.
really get given anything in it. So I think something like that's not something that everybody knows. Like, and it's important to them if they do want to go that route.
Okay. And that is going to be an end to today's video. Thank you everyone for watching. Big thanks to Manny for coming in and talking to him about our Marine Corps experience, or his Marine Corps experience, sorry. If there is anybody out there who's watching these videos and has any advice or anything that they think that uh people should know, coming into the military, or just if they want to come in and do a campfire, or a campfire talks episode, just sit around, talk about different subjects and stuff related to their career field or anything. um Let us know, send us an email. If you go click on the description of the channel and scroll down, and there's a thing that says view email, go ahead and click on that. Get my email, email me, let me know. We'd be happy to have someone on here to interview them. I say we're always looking for content, but it's not so much about getting that content. It's about getting that information out to middle schoolers, high schoolers who are looking to get into this and will be soon able uh to get into it as well. Um Big things um coming up. We are possibly next week, we might be getting an interview with the owner and founder of Xyear himself. His name is Wes. I forget his last name, but Wes is the owner and founder of Xyear. We might begin an interview with him. Just to let you know, two major updates. One, we have an affiliate link with Refuge Medical, so go check out their website, maybe buy some products. It does help us out using the affiliate link, but you don't have to. Also, go make sure to go check out their best-selling product, the Bearfac 3.0, and their newest kit, the Kiddo Kit, designed to be everything you would need to treat a kid or a pediatric emergency. And with school starting back up, teachers, if you're watching, make sure to go check out their desk first aid kit. It's small, compact, and fits easily in a drawer in your desk. Second update, we now have merch. So make sure to go check out our merch store in the description of our YouTube channel. It'll also be in the description of this video. We have normal merch. Then we also have I think currently only two is on there, but we're working on a third series of merch. We have the you don't have to be an adult to put a fire merch. Don't have to be an adult to save a life, and then the serve and protect merch. We're also working on merch for military, so make sure to stay tuned to get some of that merch. And thank you for watching the video. Have a great day and stay safe.